Let's hop into it. It's great to meet you. Thank you for taking a minute out for the show today. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
You bet. So I'm curious in your world. I mean, it's very evident from news stories being in real estate how much the pandemic affected it. What have been the residuals in the market and with people getting real estate? How is that kind of rippled into 2024 right now with everything that you're doing?
Um, so we're almost 5 years past the pandemic in terms of and New York City was uniquely affected because the real estate market here was 100% shut down from mid-March to mid-June of 2020. The big change is something that everyone in the country can relate to is the mobile, just the work from home and the virtual office.
Yeah.
And so a lot of people in New York were able to work from home and sort of have a little bit more geographic flexibility.
Yeah.
But interestingly enough, New York City is a place everyone wants to be. In the case of work, sometimes people were able to both have a New York salary and live in Kansas City or wherever they wanted to live.
Yeah.
And so, what ultimately we thought, oh, people are going to sell New York, they're going to move to some tax-friendly state, or maybe kind of become a little bit more of a tax refugee. What more of what we've seen is that people own a place in New York, never sold it, bought a place somewhere else. They actually own a little bit more real estate, and really, it's New York has just continued to chug along as like a blue chip place for real estate, even though one would think so that the pandemic didn't have a as huge an impact as people thought.
Yeah. It's interesting, and we'll get into the music part of it. I was
Sure.
interviewing a musician, I think during May or June of 2020, and he lived right next to Times Square, and he was explaining what was going on. And I was just like, wait, wait, wait. There was no one. It was kind of gray. It was raining. And I just imagined like David Lynch and Rod Serling having an arm wrestling match in the middle of Times Square. Like totally bizarre.
It was the craziest time. I lived. I had an I have three children. I have an apartment. Really grateful to have an apartment big enough to really we didn't drive each other nuts. And I was going for a run almost every single day with a close friend of mine who lives nearby. And we were running through Times Square and running on the street. And there were hardly any cars like parked, and there were no cars on the street. It was like this crazy, like bizarro world, but it
Yeah.
was so cool.
Yeah.
I loved it, and to not to digress about the music, but I all of a sudden when I was put my real estate business on pause for the 3 months, all of a sudden all of this music just started pouring out. I couldn't stop it. I mean, I guess I could have stopped it and be like, no, I'm gonna
Right.
go binge Netflix, but
Yeah.
I actually just started writing like crazy. I ended up writing like 25 songs and like made a whole album worth of music on GarageBand
Yeah.
and put it out. It was so I loved that time because it was such a creative time because it like all the business just was on pause.
Yeah.
I had it was a really creative period for me.
Well, I talked to a lot of musicians that were in New York, and it was like, whether they were in this unit in Brooklyn where they were stacked up, it was like there got to be a point where all the neighbors couldn't hear the horn playing all the time, right? There was just this moment, and I remember all of them would talk about this creative license that they had. They had this time, they finally didn't tour all the time, they could slow down. So there definitely was this moment. And you talk about a Bob Dylan moment. I mean, that time right there with politically, socially, a pandemic. I mean, if you were creative, there was so many things that were lightning rods during that point.
And truthfully, it changed the way that I run my business.
Yeah.
It really got to the heart of what was important. I could because I stopped everything. It was like I almost forgot how I was all the old habits.
Yeah.
So when it started up again, I had to do things in a different way. It just felt like the right thing to do. I just spent 3 months like hanging out with my family in a way that I hadn't in years. It really was like a grounding, important thing. And I think it really connected me to what is important about home and allowed me a little more insight into the way that I work with clients.
Talk about a moment of existentialism, the waiting for Godot moment. I mean, because it is. It's almost like you're just like, all right, whatever was happening before, see you later. You just kind of move on into this new vista of living, you know?
Yeah.
Um, so let's get to the heart and soul of what you do on a daily basis here in 2024. And to do that, I want to put you in front of a bunch of grade school kids, third graders, career day. Johnny in the back of the room is like, hey, what do you do for a living? How do you
Yep.
answer him?
I help people find a home that they love. And bigger picture, Johnny, or third grade or whatever we were talking about, I help people move forward in their lives. If they want to get a bigger house, if they want to get a smaller house, they want to move to a place to be closer to family. I would frame it in the way of the chapters of their life, what they're trying to do with their life. They got a new job and they want to move somewhere else. I'm the person who helps them figure out where they're going to have their home. And the way I describe it is I help people move forward in their lives, and the vehicle is real estate.
Yeah,
Real estate is the way I help them do that. And there are other people in their lives that are going to help them find a job or whatever it is. But it's very simple.
yeah,
It the explaining of it is simple. It luckily, like my kids know what I do. They don't
yeah.
know every detail, but they have the idea.
Yeah. So prior to being in real estate, you had mentioned music. So take me back to when you were in the third grade. What was the ultimate dream for you?
I used to draw pictures of houses. And of course, I used to draw like pictures of video games, like this, in this level, you're going to do this. But I got really caught up in the architecture of New Orleans, which is where I grew up. My very best friend grew up in the French Quarter, which is like the most architecturally um, specific part of New Orleans that a lot of tourists really know. And then I grew up going to a school in Uptown New Orleans, which has so much historic detail. So I was like really fascinated by homes from a very early age. And like lots of kids, I was also kind of a burgeoning entrepreneur. I was always kind of selling raffle tickets or this or that. And so as I kind of grew and just remained very curious. It was like college kind of put things together. I started to realize, okay, I'm pretty good at this sales thing. I'm pretty good at this psychology and people thing. I studied history, kind of where people and what they want to do came together. And by the time I was playing music in Boston, but for 6 years and touring. By the time I got to New York, it was like people, curiosity about people, and this like stack of skills that I'd gotten through music business and waiting tables and all these other sort of what seemed like totally random things. When I finally started working on real estate, I was like, wow, I'm really good at this.
Yeah,
And it like I just wanted to understand people, and I was like, it was just about helping people like at the most essential.
yeah,
And in doing that, and also getting to know properties and all the other basics of real estate, it was like, oh, this guy really cares about me, he wants to help me, and he does real estate. Let's give him some referrals. So it was like boom, 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 boom. It was kind of amazing. Like out
yeah,
of the gate, my stepmom said, "Oh, you'd be good in real estate as a real estate agent." I'm like, "What are you talking about?" I knew what it was. My mom was in a marketing role for a residential brokerage. It wasn't like it was completely foreign, but I never thought of it for me.
yeah,
And
yeah,
all of a sudden it was me. And I was like, I'm really good at this.
yeah. So what was the first sale? What was the moment, the sparkle in a client's eye where you're like, it validated that gut feeling you had?
2 years into the business, because I had been doing rentals, which is pretty common in New York City. The vast majority of inventory is rental apartments. And then 2 years in, I met this little old lady named Elisabetta, who was Italian, and she came in and she had gotten divorced and she wanted to buy a little apartment. It's still the smallest deal I've ever done in New York. It was a $220,000 studio apartment. And that process all of a sudden opened my eyes. I'm like, wow, all the things I didn't like about the rental business, it felt very transactional. Helping someone find a home and like they're buying it, and all the process felt like I was so invested in it and I was so invested in her. And it was like a real eye opener to like what is possible. What I did to help her is I'm going to sort of be a part of her life in some way forever.
Yeah,
Um, and and it just only got more refined over time. It had more insights about why this is important through my own life. and through helping other people. It's just been, every step of the way has been a further confirmation that this is like sacred work, you know?
It totally is. I've bought two houses and I'm still good friends with the realtor. I just for my birthday I met up with my realtor in the house that I just moved into in 2020. And I think of people that are good at real estate are like lawyers, they're like clergymen, they're like all of these things because you have to know so much. You have to know all of these socio-economical things. You have to know all of these things that are kind of cultural about where you're going. I mean, you just have to have an answer. If someone's asking you about where this place is and what's going on, there's a part of you that just has to know those things.
I would, I agree with you to a large extent. I would take it maybe a step further, Joe, and say that you also have to know when people need to listen to themselves,
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
I often don't have the answer. It's not an answer I could ever have. The answer is within my client.
Yeah.
And my job is to help create the conditions where they can figure it out.
Yeah.
Oh, this is, I don't know why I don't like all these things I said I wanted to like. I said this was on my checklist. Why don't I like anything, Scott? And like, because you think this is what you want, but we haven't figured out what you actually want.
Yeah.
And so to your point about, you say clergy, sometimes we say a therapist, right?
Right.
Where you're,
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, I think we're saying the same thing.
Yeah, 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 totally. That's a great addendum too, because I remember I still am. I've been in his house for 4 years now, and I still think he knew exactly what we needed because he kept telling us this house, and we're like, yeah, I don't know, and we kept looking at other ones, and then we finally came around, and everything that he had said that was the right thing about it was like, yeah, yeah,
Oh, right.
the domino effect just it all went down perfectly.
I think, however, the stats about how many buyers and sellers are dissatisfied with their agents, and that would say to, and I have a book coming out next year that is all about this, that there is a certain amount of, I think there are great real estate agents all over the country. I've spoken to so many of them, but I think a lot of agents are still focused on the transaction, getting that deal done,
Yeah,
and they're not thinking about it in terms of like you had a great experience, and I'm really happy to hear that. I don't think everyone I know, based on the stats, not everybody has the same experience you did, and
yeah,
so I think there's room to figure out, okay, what can a buyer do to better their own chances of success?
yeah.
And then what can real estate agents do to become better professionals?
Yeah. So I got to know in this incarnation as a musician, what was the first live show you saw in your life that just blew you away?
Well, I grew up in New Orleans, okay?
Okay.
So
Well, yeah.
let me just preface it by saying like it's in the bloodstream, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Um, I used to go to Jazz Fest as a little kid, and so I can't remember who's the first band that like I hung out and saw, but I can tell you like as a 12-year-old kid, my best friend in the world, a guy named Howard Lambert, his family owned Preservation Hall.
Wow.
And so as a kid, I would go to the hall and hang out,
Wow.
right? Like either on during the set or in the afternoon on the weekend, and like we just run around Preservation Hall and play, mess around on the drums and the piano up on stage. And then when I was 12, his mom was the tour manager for the band when they went on tour. So I went on tour with them. So like my mind got totally blown at 12 years old. I was like, wow, I was selling CDs, or I guess I was selling like records and tapes back in the day, and I was so turned on by that experience of being on a bus. Um, the music I made was not jazz. It wasn't certainly wasn't Dixieland jazz, but it was really informed by that feeling of like camaraderie on the bus, and just these like super old guys that I thought they were super old. They look like wax figures, like they
Yeah.
were so old, and then they kind of creep their way up on the stage and then come to life. It was so that was like the main kind of formative experience.
Yeah.
And then, high school, I went and saw the Stones when I was 15, and that blew me away. And then you can in New Orleans there you can get into bars. So I started seeing like live brass bands and stuff in my teenage years, and was performing the whole time. And it all kind of gets into the mix, and then it comes out however it comes out.
Absolutely. Well, I was thinking when you said New Orleans, I was like, I wanted to bring up Preservation Hall, and it's so weird you had such an ends. So they still don't have AC and you can't record anything in there, correct?
I think that's right.
Okay.
I'm still close friends with my friend Howard and his first cousin Ben Jaffe runs is the music art director, the director art
Yeah.
director of Preservation Hall, and I think they just bought or rented the building next door. So I think they've expanded a bit. I'm pretty sure they don't have air condition, but
Yeah.
don't hold me to it.
Yeah. Totally. So who's been your hero? Who's been that person that's been a bedrock for you in your career?
Gosh, that has changed over time. I would say, some of the heroes, some of the people that have really inspired me have been um, gosh, like my wife she has an uncle that has been a mentor for years and just kind of a paragon of like, how would you behave? How would you hold yourself in business and personally? And like I really give him a shout out. Seth Siegel is a great guy. There are a lot of I would call them like self-help kind of folks that have, I think, put themselves out to and really made a big difference in the world. Guys like your Tony Robbins and Ed Milet, and I would even go on the list, which is probably a little bit out there, but a podcaster, Mark Maron,
Yeah.
during starting kind of 5, 6 years ago, the way that he's so vulnerable and his own story has been a real inspiration to me.
Yeah.
Um, but I'm inspired by the way I like to say it is like everybody has a story, and I look like there's something to learn from everyone out there, and that's one of the things that drives my real estate business is like I just want to get to know the person in front of me, and I think there's a lot to be learned, but world's full of a lot of inspiring people if you just open your eyes.
Absolutely. Yeah. And especially in podcasting. I forgot about Mark Maron. Everybody's been so enraptured with Joe Rogan. It's created such a cloud base that I totally forgot about Maron. He is a great cat. And I used to listen to him.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes I get a little uh, like it's a little bit of navel gazing sometimes, and I'm like, I get it, but I give him a lot of rope,
Yeah.
or let him run with a lot of line. It's not that I like or dislike Joe Rogan. I've just never gotten uh, caught up in those conversations. So I mean, Mark has these cool people, and there are a lot of musicians,
Yep.
and for some reason, I'm just fascinated with the way like comedians' brains work.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
They're so creative and also in many ways kind of like tortured. It's like, how do they work through that? It's pretty interesting to me.
It is very interesting. So, how do you balance your life with the creative part? You got the right and left. You're a musician. You're doing real estate, the biggest spot on the planet.
Yeah.
How do you parlay that stress and all of that and take care of yourself and do your job at a high level? What is that gas every day for you to do it?
Well, that's a big question. How I would answer it is say that I've not always done the best job of balancing that. Oh, geez. Somebody's just happened here. I'm so sorry.
Oh, you're good. No worries, man. It's all good.
Okay. I don't know what just happened there. That's
Yeah.
never happened before. Can you still see me?
Yeah. Yeah. You're good. Yeah. Everything's good.
That's terrible. Sorry.
Yeah. No worries.
Okay. In terms of the um, in terms of, whew, give me one sec.
Yeah. You bet. It's a big question.
Yeah, what I would say in terms of how I balance, I've not always done the best job of balancing the stress. I would say that I burned myself out almost completely about 10 years ago, and I needed to completely rebuild my business.
Yeah.
I realized like I was coming at it from like this grind, and like there are a lot of people out there. There's these books, Rise and Grind, and like grind it out, and like it's all about hard work. And I think there's truth that you got to work hard, but I had to figure out how to work smart also.
Yeah.
And a lot of this was like putting in I've run marathons, so I had to put in, you know, practice. How am I going to stay healthy? How am I going to eat healthy? About 5.5 years ago, I stopped drinking. Like I just needed to like clear the decks and
Yeah.
figure out how it was I was going to take better care of myself, meditate, those kinds of things. Um, but I think the most important thing is like if you can convey to your clients, I really care about you and your success, you even say like, I love you, like, like convey like to that extent. but I also need boundaries so I can take care of myself. It's like I don't need to take a call at 8:30, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock at night. Because if you don't set boundaries, people are going to test, they're going to test them, but you just have to know when to say no. So I think the beginning of my business was like, I would just say yes to everything until I burned out. And I'm like, okay, I need to figure out what all this looks like. And then eventually you figure out how to say no, you figure out how to delegate and to really bring on talented people onto the team. And then from there, it just grows. It's like you trust your clients understand like you have a process that works. Okay, Scott's doing this intentionally for a reason. Let's trust him. And then the team, you start to trust your team and trust them, empower them, and they take over more things. And you sort of look up 10 years later and you're like, oh, I have a team of 10. We've sold $1.5 billion of real estate. We have systems in place that really help home buyers like find a home they love. We help sellers through that process of finding a buyer that they love. And it like just it's like I call it the magnetic method. It's like you just bring buyer and seller together in a much more intuitive way,
Yeah.
and it seems to work really well.
So the thing about real estate is there's a lot of risk involved in it. What's the biggest risk that you've taken in your life that maybe you thought was daunting in the beginning, but turned out to be one of the best things you ever did?
Ooh, well, in my life, I've taken, I was living in Boston. I was in a band. I was like just being in a band. I went to an Ivy League school and joining the band.
Yeah.
That was a crazy move as a
Yeah.
22-year-old kid. And then to leave the band and come to New York with no job, no place to live, no girlfriend, basically no money. That
Yeah.
was probably the move to New York was probably the most insane thing that I did. And I was like on a razor's edge whether this was going to work out. Um, I had like some residuals from a music commercial that I recorded that came in like just in time. I was selling music equipment. I was like at the end of my rope. I'd borrowed like $6,000 from my mom. And I was like, if I don't figure this out, I'm gonna have to go home.
Yeah.
And that was the last thing I wanted. And real estate sort of fell, it sort of happened. And then this business, like the risk, like waking up every morning and not knowing, what the quote unquote, paycheck's going to look like at the end of the year, that never felt like risk to me. I always was like, I'm betting on myself.
Sure.
Joe, like this was I felt very safe about this risk.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Like I'm going to figure it out, man. But
Yeah.
but I would say the biggest risk was just moving to New York, big city and the
Uh-huh.
craziness. Yeah.
So flip that around after all of this mileage and everything that you've done, what are you the proudest of?
Looking back on this, I think the hardest thing for me was the transition from where I call it the Scott Show, where it's like I'm operating this real estate business. I'm the one who has to do everything, and sort of that transition to where I'm empowering this team. I love my team. They're I want to see them be more and more successful, really turning it where it's not about me anymore. It's really all about my clients, which it already was about my clients, but then turning like all of the operations and everything, like letting that go so I could do the things that I'm really good at. I think that's what I'm most proud of. And I think my kids see that like, that I'm growing this team and I'm talking about the team and it's like all of the mentorship and all of that I think is something I can look back and go, wow, I did not think I was a great delegator. All these things I always said I wasn't good at, and I think I've gotten pretty decent at.
So at the end of the day, Scott, everyone has a perception of you, family, friends, clients, everyone that knows you, but you run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
I'm a person that really deeply cares. Sometimes it's like I'm so intense that I think some people sometimes have a hard time like seeing that, like the outward expression of that. And so sometimes my actions have to speak louder than my words.
Yeah.
But I think I'm a deeply creative, strategic thinker, problem solver, a resourceful person who cares deeply about his clients and all the people in his life. And I want to make the world a little bit better.
So talk to me a little bit about the book that's coming out, when it's going to come out, how people can get a copy, reaching out to you, following you, any of the good business, where can they go?
Yeah, so they can go to Harris Residential if they want to just find me. It's like an easy place. If they go on LinkedIn and look up Scott Harris, they can find me there. They can look, if they're looking for the book. The book is called The Pursuit of Home. It's not coming out until October, but it'll be on pre-sale in the new year. And I have a podcast of the same name where we talk about real people buying real estate.
Yes.
The book is about what is the real journey
Yeah.
that you're going to take as a home buyer between that gets you from here to home.
Yeah.
And that's the stuff, that personal, emotional, spiritual, psychological journey no
Yeah.
one talks about,
Yeah.
but
Sure.
everybody goes through.
Uh-huh. Yep.
You won't see it on social media
Yep.
about people having the meltdown after they got the accepted offer and like all of a sudden they go crazy, or when they have money issues or whatever it is for you as a person, you're gonna have some issues. So I want to bring this conversation out into the light,
Yeah.
give it some sunshine, and so that everyone can say, oh, I'm not crazy, I'm not alone. This
Yep.
is something that everybody goes through. And then I can be prepared for it. I can pick an agent more thoughtfully that's going to help me through this.
Yep.
I can figure out the way, again, like to make this as easy so that my home is drawn to me
Yeah.
and that it's not such a grind,
Yeah.
that it can be so much more of like a nourishing experience. And then at the end, it's like the home should be something of a launch pad that really helps you move forward in the rest of your life, supports you.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm really up to these days.
Yeah.
And, I've got amazing agents that are on board to help my clients do this. And I really believe that everyone out there, whether you're in New York or whether you're in Kansas City or wherever you are, you deserve to have partners that understand what to do to help you do the same, to have the same experience.
Absolutely. Well said. Scott, this has been a joy. Thank you, sir. Thank you for your story. Thank you for your time. Have a great 2024 or 25, I should say, and have a great holiday season.
Thanks, Joe. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Cheers.